What if I told you that becoming invisible to the person you once craved is the first step to becoming unshakable to the world? There exists a moment in a man's life where silence becomes louder than screams, where the absence of reaction carries more weight than any explanation, where detachment is no longer a defense, but a declaration. She used to read you like a book dog, eared and familiar, comfortable with every page, every chapter, certain that the ending would never surprise her. But what happens when the story writes itself without her, when you no longer beg to be seen, when your peace is no longer tethered to her gaze, when you finally realize that validation is a mirage and that self-respect tastes better than being understood? In the stillness between longing and legacy, a new man begins to take form, not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, but out of necessity, because a man who has been broken and rebuilt no longer resembles the one who once bled for attention. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." And that's what you did. You found strength, not in control, but in clarity, not in answers, but in bound. Sees not in her presence, but in your own absence. You didn't disappear. You dissolved the version of you that was addicted to reassurance, that clung to hope like a lifeline, that mistook attention for affection. That man faded not with drama, but with discipline. And now she notices, not because you made a scene, but because you made silence your strategy. She reaches out, expecting echoes of the old you, soft, apologetic, accessible. But what she finds is space, dense and untouchable, like gravity. And for the first time she realizes she's orbiting a man she can no longer land on. You didn't grow cold. You became composed. You didn't stop feeling. You started filtering. And every breath you didn't waste, every word you didn't say, became a boundary she can cross, because the man she knew responded. The man you are now reflects, and reflection is dangerous to those who cannot face themselves. Socrates once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." But what about the over-examined one? The life spent dissecting every glance, every message, every silence, trying to solve a puzzle that was never yours to finish. You've put the pieces down not because you gave up, but because you outgrew the game. And now she's left staring at a board with no opponent, wondering when the rules changed. But they didn't. You did. There was a time when her mood dictated your mind. A delay in her reply triggered storms inside you. A passive remark sent your self-worth spiraling. But now you don't check your phone. You check your breath, your focus, your mission, because you're no longer seeking connection that costs your sanity. The old you would have folded at her return, jumped at the chance to be chosen again, but the evolved you doesn't need to be picked when he's already chosen himself. And choosing yourself doesn't look like defiance. It looks like calm, measured footsteps away from cycles that once owned you. Imagined walking into a room where she stands, expecting the familiar, the man who flattered her shadows, who danced for her crumbs. But instead, she feels it before you speak, the gravity of your stillness. She tries the old tricks, the delayed responses, the vague hints, the manipulative nostalgia, but nothing lands because your emotions are no longer up for auction. That's ours, when it dawns not with thunder but with quiet horror. She doesn't know this man, and worse, he doesn't need her to. She can scroll, she can stalk, she can reminisce. But none of it grants her access anymore, not because you shut her out, but because you've stepped into spaces she was never invited to. Your evolution is not exclusive to her absence. It was forged in the nights you wrestled with your own worth, in the mornings you got up without a good reason, in the silence you finally stopped screaming. Internally, Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and in doing so you become unreachable, not in location but in essence." She's not blocked. She's just bypassed, not rejected, just relevant, not hated, just unnecessary. And that is what burns more than any goodbye. You're not asking for closure anymore, because you understand now that closure is just another leash begging for emotional permission to let go. And you don't ask for what you already gave yourself. You don't need the final chapter read aloud when you already wrote your own ending. And she thought that ending would include her, that you'd wait, that the book would pause, that you'd freeze in time like a character waiting for her return. But instead you kept writing, and the plot left her behind. There was a time when every breath was a negotiation with yourself, when the void she left felt like punishment, when your entire identity trembled in the uncertainty of her affection. But not anymore. Now your identity is sculpted not by her attention, but by your intention. And intention is unshakable when it's not reliant on being seen. She once mistook your openness for weakness, your devotion for desperation, your kindness for compliance. But now she stands in front of a man who answers with silence and loves with standards, and that silence it's sacred. It's not passive, it's powered by the sacred tension between who you were and who you're becoming. And that tension is what makes her uneasy. She remembers the man who over-explained, who bent until he broke, who lived in constant fear of not being enough. But she can't find him now, because he no longer needs to be found. That man has been replaced by presence. And presence doesn't chase prey, presence waits and observes and decides, and that decision is the death of manipulation. You're not building walls, you're planting flags. Your energy isn't protected out of fear, it's guarded out of reverence. You no longer offer emotional clarity to those who sowed confusion. You no longer make space for chaos dressed as closure. You don't explain sealed ends. To those who never listen to your words, you've become someone she cannot decode because her language no longer applies. Your growth made her obsolete, not because she lacked value, but because she never valued what you were becoming, and what you're becoming is dangerous, not in destruction but in discernment. Because now you can love without losing yourself and detach without bitterness, and that terrifies those who only knew how to control through access. Seneca wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage, and every day you choose to live, not react, to build, not beg to step into your future, instead of bleeding in your past, is an act of that courage." She doesn't understand it, not because you've become a mystery, but because she never understood what she was standing next to. To begin with, now she watches from afar, not through malice but through memory, hoping for a flicker of the man she once dismissed. But all she sees is posture, focus, and poise. You are not hiding, you are healing. You are not quiet because you're weak. You're quiet because you've seen the cost of noise. You're not heartless. You're just no longer handing your heart to people who hold it with uncertainty. You're not lost in thought anymore. You are anchored in intention. You're not withholding out of pain, you're preserving out of principle. And that preservation has made you immune to her strategies. The ones that once cracked your resolve now bounce off the quiet shield you've built from nights alone and days filled with forward motion. There's a sacred discomfort that arises when a man no longer needs to be understood. And that discomfort lives in her now, a constant reminder that you are not who she expected to return. Because you didn't return, you ascended. She looks for vulnerability and sees vision. She searches for wounds and finds wisdom. She hopes for confusion and meets clarity, and none of it adds up to the narrative she's been telling herself. She'll call it ego, but it's self. Respect, she'll call it distance, but it's discipline. She'll say you changed, and she'll be right. But what she won't say out loud is that the man you became no longer responds to the one she used to be. And in that space between the new you and the version she remembers lies the truth that she was never equipped to handle your evolution. You are not responding, not because you're cold, but because we're warm in places she never reached. You are not chasing, not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring about yourself more. She stayed behind, thinking the chapter paused, waiting for the page to turn back to her story. But the book kept writing itself, and now it's in a language she no longer reads, because your love language evolved from access to absence, from reaction to reflection, from explanation to elevation. There's a gravity in your silence now, and she feels it like a presence that makes her question her own volume, because when noise meets stillness, it echoes, and she's hearing herself for the first time. But you don't respond, not because you are petty, but because you no longer participate in patterns that pulled you under. She used to provoke emotion. Now she awakens awareness, and that awareness builds you. No longer fantasize about what could have been. You focus on what must be, what must grow, what must be protected, because the man who knows his purpose becomes immune to the people who tried to distract him from it. Your absence is not a punishment. It's a recalibration. You're no longer waiting for someone to match your effort. You're waiting for your life to mirror your discipline. You're not passive, you're precise. And in that precision, she sees a man who no longer trades identity for intimacy. The man she once knew found power in being chosen. The man you are now finds power in choosing wisely. She can't trace you anymore because you've stopped leaving breadcrumbs and started leaving boundaries. And the beauty of that boundary is that it doesn't come with explanation. It arrives as a presence that doesn't flinch, as a spirit that doesn't seek applause. She keeps testing the past, expecting to find the same man, but you are no longer coded in old language. Your rhythm has changed. Your melody is no longer familiar. She thinks you're distant, but you've never been more here, just not for her, not in the way she remembers, because memory doesn't grant access, effort does, and hers expired the day she stopped showing up for your value. Now you stand in silence, Monument to restraint, not stone cold, but steel calm, and she realizes too late that attention doesn't equal investment and access doesn't equal understanding. You used to bleed for connection. Now you breathe for purpose, and that breath is sacred. You inhale your mission. You exhale anything that once distorted your vision. You are not punishing her, you're preserving you. You're not losing doors, you're opening paths, and she just isn't on them. She can no longer interrupt your peace with her confusion, because your peace is not built on agreement. It's built on alignment, and she doesn't align. There's a power in being misunderstood when it's by people who were never meant to comprehend your depth, and you've stopped translating your soul for those fluent only in surface. You didn't become better to prove anything. You became better because not growing was killing the best parts of you. She'll wonder why you're silent, and she'll miss that the silence is not absence, it's arrival. You've arrived at the man you were always meant to be, and that man doesn't need closure, he needs clarity, and clarity doesn't knock on closed doors, it builds new homes. You no longer mourn her absence because you now understand some losses are actually protection. Some rejections are divine redirection. You lost her, yes, but you found you, and that trade is the origin of every great evolution. She will remember the way you used to light up at her name, the way your voice used to shake when she pulled away, the way your world used to shift for her approval. But all she'll find now is composure, stillness, focus. Because when you rise without noise, you become unforgettable. Not because of what you say, but because of what you no longer have to. This is not revenge. This is renaissance, not retribution, but resurrection. The rising of a man who stopped asking what he's worth and started embodying it. You are not broken, you're built. You are not cold. You're centered, and the world may still try to draw the old you out, but you now know the sacred power of self-possession. The past doesn't pull you back because it no longer has your signature. You didn't walk away, you just stopped walking in circles, and now the loops are gone, replaced by lines forward, clean, sovereign. She thought you'd return, but you evolved past recognition. And now that's the lesson. Not all changes are visible, some are vibrational. Not all departures are loud, some are internal. She doesn't recognize who you are now, and that was always the goal, because the man you are now is not a reaction, he is a revelation. So pause now and breathe. Ask yourself what you've been carrying that was never yours to hold. What loops you've mistaken for purpose, what noise you've confused for love, and then let it go, because in a world addicted to attention, your peace is your protest, your presence is your poetry, your silence is your strength. You don't have to be remembered by the people who never truly saw you, you just have to remember yourself and live accordingly, because in a world of echoes, a man who speaks only when necessary becomes the one voice they never forget.